Millions of Americans who suffer from sleep apnea depend on CPAP machines to get them through the night, but it turns out these devices are releasing cancer-causing materials, slowly killing users in their sleep. At a meeting in Las Vegas, RT's Brent Jabbar sat down with attorney Troy Bouck to discuss the dangers of these devices.
Troy, tell us exactly about the safety concerns of these CPAP machines.
Okay, well, basically the CPAPs, the BiPAPs, and the ventilators all use the same type of foam that is used for sound abatement, and that's called PE pure foam. And that foam basically breaks down over time into little pieces, and those pieces get inhaled into a person's lung, and they can also be digested into the person's system like that. And so you can get anything from kidney cancer, liver cancer, nasal cancers we've been seeing, and you can also get sort of inflammation of the lungs, and it can cause significant inflammation of the lungs. And I recently signed up a guy who has sarcoidosis, and I think that's going to be one of the injuries in this case.
And the companies behind these CPAP machines and BiPAP machines and so on, they have to tout the quietness of these machines, because if you've ever been around a loved one or had to sleep in the same room as someone with a CPAP machine, these type of ventilators, they can be very loud. They can be quite a noise nuisance, correct?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And in fact, for the DreamStation line, which is a very significant product line that Philips advertises, their key advertisement was that it was 64% quieter than the competition. And so this foam was their competitive edge.
And do we know if a company like Philips knew of the dangers of using this type of foam to actually dampen the sound?
Well, I think there's indicia there that they absolutely knew, and I think when all the evidence comes out, we're going to see that they knew. There's no question about it, right? And really, even in the way this recall was set up, we saw that on April 13th of this year, 2021, Philips announced a new product line, the DreamStation 2. And it was supposed to be, hey, this great new product line, but it uses a different type of foam. And then you see just 2 weeks later, on April 26th, they announced in Philips' quarterly report, hey, we're going to have to take a reserve because that old line that we've been selling is dangerously defective. And then 2 weeks after that, they issue a recall of the DreamStation. So they basically announced their new product line, and then they, recalled their old product line.
So it is essentially that they knew there was a problem, but they said, wait, before we do something, let's make sure we have the next product in line set up so that we don't have these issues, so we don't lose any profit.
Brent, you're exactly right. That's exactly how it looks.
And where is the litigation with this right now?
So right now, the JPML panel, which is the federal panel of judges, just decided this past week that they're going to situate this MDL. They actually agreed to form the MDL, and they've issued it to Judge Conte in the Western District of Pennsylvania, which is Pittsburgh, basically.
And how many people are we talking about being involved? I mean, I know we say that millions of Americans, these are very common devices. I mean, I think we all know somebody who uses a CPAP machine for sleep apnea, because if you don't know about sleep apnea, I mean, you could wake up because of the way it closes your throat and the way the air is actually transmitted through your body, it actually can wake you up hundreds of times, or up to 100 times, that is to say, an hour while you're trying to get a good night's rest. So this is something that affects people and can really be detrimental if you have to struggle with it, and the way we're looking at this right now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Sleep apnea is a serious condition. If you don't or are not able to use your CPAP machine, like in this case due to the recall, you could potentially die because it keeps your airways open. And that's the problem if your airways happen to close up and your system, your internal system didn't wake yourself up to take that extra breath of air, you could potentially pass away.
And then you brought up an interesting point there, because you talked about the FDA and regulators here. I mean, these devices have to be approved, and it's the same thing we see with medication. They have to be approved by regulators in the United States and in any country generally that they're selling these in. So when that's the case, why did regulators miss this?
That's a good question. And it's really because they're not the ones doing the actual testing usually. They're having to rely on the company to self-report. hey, these are the claims that we're seeing in people, contacting us. And if the company simply doesn't transmit them on to the FDA may never know, right? And it's the same with all drugs. The FDA is not the ones doing the testing. They're looking at all the data that the companies produce while doing their testing.
And what is Philips actually saying in response to as these concerns? Obviously, they've done the recall, but what were they saying as far as when we start to see litigation coming forward?
Well, they actually came out and they said, as part of this recall, unless you absolutely have to use these devices, don't use them, except for the ventilators. Ventilators are sort of a life support device, and so they've told people, do not stop using them until you have an alternative device to go to. But for the CPAPs and BiPAPs, they basically said you need to contact your doctor and determine if your doctor weighs the risks versus the reward of using the machine. And that's a lot to put on a doctor. And I've talked to lots of pulmonologists now, and they're quite upset about this because it is basically having a doctor make a medical decision based on information they're not aware of. Because, the pulmonologist that I spoke to said, hey, I don't know how dangerous these machines are. I haven't done any studies. I haven't seen any results. There's no epi studies in there. So how can I make that reasonable decision and tell my patients, oh yeah, continue to use it? Philips needs to be coming forward and bringing this information to us. How dangerous are your machines? You're saying you're recalling them all. You're saying they could be carcinogenic, but what are we talking here? What's the probabilities? What's the chances?
Troy Bauk, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Brent.
Beovu is a popular injection used to treat macular degeneration, but the medicine has been shown to actually cause permanent vision loss and blindness. Brent Jabbour also interviewed attorney Joshua Harris at the aggressive marketing campaign that's being ignored, and he's ignoring the risk of this new product.
Tell us about this issue with Beovu.
Well, Beovu is an eye injection for macular degeneration produced by Novartis. It received FDA approval in October of 2019, and since then there were about an estimated 60,000 vials of this that were prescribed. Now, what Novartis did was they had a heavy marketing campaign for this, and they were going against their competitors Eylea and Lucenta, which require numerous injections throughout the year to treat AMD, age-related macular degeneration. What Novartis did was they claimed that their drug was just as effective with half the number of injections, which was appealing to doctors and patients because the less times they had to get jabbed in the eye with a needle, that seemed more effective. But what we learned was that they lied on their clinical data to the FDA. The FDA didn't catch it, and now they were forced to have a label change in June of 2020.
So you're telling me they tried to cut corners, that they tried to say, well, while you need multiple injections, we only need one, and that didn't quite work out that way.
No, in fact, they were seeing such high adverse event rates compared to the safer alternatives in the other two drugs that were already proven effective on the market. So what happened was Novartis then had to do a label change because the American Society of Retinal Specialists went back and did a safety review on Novartis's clinical trial data. And what they learned there was that Novartis severely underestimated and severely underreported the number of adverse events to try to make their drug look more effective and safe so they could get a good label from the FDA. And the issue is the FDA doesn't test these drugs. They get it from the drug company. So if they underreport or misreport, then the FDA just goes with what they've got.
And I mean, the fact that they lied on the data, maybe I'm saying lied is the wrong word, but misrepresented their data to the FDA, I mean, that seems like, that doesn't even need attorneys. The FDA should be taking care of that directly, right?
Well, you would think so, and they're forcing them to change the label, but that's not enough. In fact, the problems have persisted so much that in May of this year, 2021, almost 2 full years after the drug's on the market, Novartis has completely stopped phase 3 clinical trials because it's so damaging that they don't even feel comfortable testing it on people for these clinical trials. So unfortunately, the FDA has not done enough to do anything about this. So, our law firm stepped in, and we're representing folks who have suffered, and, people are going blind in the worst cases and losing vision and having inflammation and all sorts of other injuries and eye problems.
And how many people are we seeing being affected by this?
The drug was only on the market for a short period, but because of the aggressive marketing campaign, now, like I said earlier, there's an estimated 60,000 vials of these that have been sent out and an estimated about 40,000 people that have probably received Beovu injections. So usually these adverse events that we're seeing happen fairly quickly after there's injections. So I don't know the full extent, but I'm sure there's got to be tens of thousands of people who've been affected by this out there.
And you would have to imagine, I mean, a lot of this basically comes down to negligence from Novartis, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if they took the time to do what they wanted to do and make a safe, effective drug, they could have done that. They could have reported this to the FDA and been honest and open. But instead, they cut the corners so they could get this drug on the market and sell it. And in the first quarter alone it was on the market, it made $68 million. So their lies and their marketing campaign were effective for them. They made money off this.
And how, I mean, this may not be a question you have an answer to, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this. The fact is that, you know, like we've said, we hear about this over and over again, that the FDA essentially puts the ball in the court of the drug maker to do the research and give us the trial data. And that's how they make their decision. Is that the best way to do this when we see so many problems with drugs as we go through this?
No, and the FDA is severely overworked, overextended, and undersupported. And the problem is that they're hoping and praying that these companies that want to make money do the right thing to make that money. But I'm sure you've seen it before, the corporate greed. It's too easy to worry about the bottom line and not worry about the end user.
Well, right, and when you have to answer to shareholders, not to your patients, that seems like a huge problem there.
Well, the Wall Street and the tickers always tell the truth, you know.
Absolutely. Now, where is litigation with this right now?
So litigation has commenced. At least our firm's filed a few cases in the District of Nebraska that have survived motion to dismiss phase. So we're getting ready to start serving discovery and start getting documents from Novartis. And we're confident that when we see those, it's going to show the true extent of what they knew when they underreported these issues to the FDA. And then we're pushing for an aggressive trial date.
And you mentioned this earlier, that this all forced a label change. What does that label change mean?
So a label change, the two specific injuries are retinal vasculitis and retinal vascular occlusion and blindness. The label originally in October 2019, when Novartis said, hey, FDA, our drug's safe, our drug's okay. Here's the few issues you may have. It may burn, redness a few days afterwards. Didn't say anything about the severe issues that we've seen pop up in people. So label change now requires Novartis to say, oh, well, in addition to these other things, you may go blind, which a lot of patients and a lot of doctors would say, well, it's not worth it. And they would have bypassed it, which means that Novartis would have sold less and made less money.
It's one of those things where it seems like the side effect is much worse than the disease it was meant to be treating.
Absolutely.
Joshua Harris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all for tonight. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at facebook.com/RT America's Lawyer and stream us live on YouTube. Be sure to check out RT's new portable app where you can watch all your favorite shows. I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer, where every week we tell you the stories that corporate media is ordered not to tell because their advertisers won't let them. Have a great night.